everyone, I'm Ari here with Rachel and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week we're on episode 219 asking our guest, what are some different ways you can use writing? Before we dive into the topic, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening if you haven't already. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with friends and feel free to write a review.
Now, please help us welcome Frances Altman to the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Fran. It's great to have you on the podcast.
I'm happy and delighted to be with you because I'm always interested in talking with people who like to talk about different phases and parts and kind of categories of writing.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to this conversation. But before we start, would you like to tell everyone why you chose to discuss this topic?
Well, I'm wondering myself, or why I pose the question, because it's really such an open-ended and broad topic. I think that I was trying to talk about the whole field of communications, that it's broad and that it offers many opportunities, and that there's a variety of styles and genres. For example, like fiction and nonfiction, and then you start breaking that down, and then you get into marketing and TV scripts and poetry, and you can just keep going, moving into other areas of communications. So if you can write one sentence complete, I think that's how you can just branch out into it with a little learning, of course. You can relearn any other phase of writing. You can go to YouTube and they'll tell you how to write the nonfiction, so how to write poetry or how to write different kinds of marketing. So that was sort of what I meant, I guess, but now I've elaborated so much. Anyway, that's what I meant in the first place.
I think that's one of the reasons why we saw that topic idea and we were like, oh, that's a good one, because it is such a broad question and it has so many different meanings. So it'll be interesting to deep dive into the different ways we could use writing as an outlet.
Yeah, I agree, because I think when people say writing, it's automatic that we think author and fiction. I mean, not even non-fiction. It's almost always, oh, I'm a writer. Oh, what have you written? And almost everyone thinks fiction. And as you've mentioned, there's TV scripts and poetry and copywriting, and there's so many other things. And I think it's kind of a good topic to talk about, to remind, especially new writers coming in, that there are so many things they could try. It doesn't have to just be write that novel.
Right. I agree that there are so many styles and categories. Yes, you're absolutely right. That's what they always think of first is fiction. Hardly anyone thinks of nonfiction. I read that out of 70 books, only one would be nonfiction. Most people are trying to escape or think of romance and historical. And now I ran across something called retro, which really means just going back in time. But now that's a new label that they put on. And then there's memoirs. Those are becoming more and more popular. Within the mystery writing category, now there's true crime. And even the other day, poetry now has reverted back to an old style that's known as lyric essays, so that they're writing essays and their poetry together. And the poem just keeps moving on, rolling on, and in a poetic type prose. So as I said in the beginning there's so many different categories. And like reviews, for instance, everything from books to movies and theater products, you can just keep rolling on, I guess, if you find something that you're comfortable about. And one of the things that sort of bothers me now is that we have, instead of writing long sentences online, we now use sort of shortcut writing where we're using emojis, and even at the bottom they'll give you a prompt as to what you can say to write your next email. So yeah, we're not writing in length anymore.
That is so true. I actually hate those email prompts. I hate them. It's like, it does not take 2 minutes to click reply and actually reply yourself. And I think it will degrade people's writing ability. I remember when I started writing on a blog, it was back in 2013. And I remember it wasn't short form content, but it wasn't long. It was like, I don't know, maybe about 500, 700 words. They were kind of like, that was expected. And then as it got in, I might be wrong, Rachel, jump in if I'm wrong, I think it was like 2016, 17, 18, long form became a big thing where you were writing like 4,000 words. People wanted depth, intensity in their articles, in their stories. And then, as you said, like things like Twitter became more popular and everyone's using emojis, and suddenly it's short form content again. And anyone with the long blogs, because everyone seems to have no focus, it's like, I can't read something that's 1,000 words. I'll just skim. And that's it. So we've just gone to skimming everything.
Yes, you just keep moving on. And I don't know, Facebook, of course, now some of them just limit, if you'll buy a few dollars more, where you can expand your messaging and things like that and write within 50 words. So but we are learning. And the big problem, I think, when we first started writing on emails, we weren't listening to what we were writing. We were just writing something back real snappy. And sometimes what you were saying were hurting people's feelings. I mean, they're snapping back angrily. Now that doesn't seem to bother anyone. I guess we're just snapping back with each other so quickly that we don't care how that touches them. But that was one of the big problems that I kept trying to tell students, that, you have to be careful and find yourself a word that you're comfortable with, like thank you for responding or thank you for contacting me. And then you can sort of move smoothly into what you're saying in an email. As you say, blogging, of course, has come along and given people an opportunity to write a little bit more and to express their feelings a little more. And there's bloggers, chains of bloggers that you can just, as you know, can contact, you can become involved with, and you actually meet them like I'm meeting you today. So everything in writing is moving along, but at a more rapid pace.
Yeah, it's really interesting to how everything has kind of like grown and evolved over the years. I remember when I was in college, my writing professor said that even his emails, when he would send somebody an email, he would reread it and edit it at least 5 times before sending it. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Why would you do that? I grew up in the 90s, so I grew up with the evolution of email, and I would send an email and send it off. And absolutely, I would get into so many arguments with people because you can't read the emotion. And after he said that, I started editing my emails and started rereading them to make sure that they sounded professional, formal, casual, whatever tone I wanted to send. And it made a huge difference. And it's, something as simple as an email, you don't think about that, but it's true. Any form of writing, especially on the internet, you have to be careful. And with blogging, it's the same thing. Ari, you mentioned how long form became a thing, but over the years, I think people started skimming and people realized, well, maybe long form wasn't as good of an idea, because just because it's longer doesn't mean that the information is that much better. There's a lot of filler that gets added, and then therefore people start skimming, and it's a vicious cycle. And I'm going to backtrack for 1 second. Fran, you mentioned earlier how a lot of people, they don't think about nonfiction. When you think of writing, nonfiction is probably one of the last things you come up with. And I think part of that is the instant gratification. And a lot of people write to market these days. They look at what books are more popular, what's selling, and what genres are more popular. And that's what they write. They don't necessarily write what they want or necessarily what they're interested in. They just see what people are buying. So they're like, I'm going to write that.
Well, right now it does seem as though they used to call it self-help, but now it's the same thing, except the categories they're talking about recovering from divorces, recovering from dozens of types of illnesses, particularly cancer or tumors, how they overcame those. And that's sort of a fiction. They put that in a fiction format, and that's what people are sort of reading. That's what's popular now. Also, the fantasy part of it is, maybe you don't call it fantasy, but you're escaping into other worlds where you're carefree and that kind of thing. So that's why all the types of fiction really, really appeal to people. What is it about? I don't know. I couldn't believe the figure. It said there were around the world, there's something like 9,000 books issued, written or published each day. That's mind-boggling. Who reads all that many? But when you go through and I have been monitoring the book club lists and things like that, and I'm finding that you don't see the same author over and over again. You find everybody, they latch on to a certain author and they'll follow that chain of his books, of her books. But a lot of times now they're picking up stories from, even 2 and 3 years ago in the book club. So it's, you can't put a real sure thing on any of these types of writing. If that it covers such a big 9,000 books a day are my competitors.
But that's it. It's so incredible. I think obviously with the self-publishing market obviously gave a big push to that. And there is almost a trend chase, even in fantasy. Like if you have someone makes it big and they write something and it's got dragons in it. It feels like the moment that sort of hits high, everybody's writing about dragons, and not just writing about dragons. And I like dragons. I have no issue with that. They're marketing it going, oh, if you liked this person's book about dragons, then you'll love my book about dragons. And then it's like a chain of everybody writing about until that kind of tapers off. And then sci-fi is back up and running. And it's, oh my gosh.
You've hit it there. Going back just a minute to emails and writing shorter, I found too, particularly when I was teaching in the business school, the age of the person receiving the email determined sort of what their reaction was. Because if you were too the younger people, and even today, my granddaughters, I send them an email and they just will send me back an emoji, a face, or they'll put yak yak or something like that to know that they've received it. But that I have also discovered you have to be really careful if you're emailing someone that's, getting into their 40s and 50s. Because, yeah, they do listen to every word. They're much more touchy. And from what you might call the old school.
I have to admit, when I worked in business, it was like there was a kind of a rule. It was regards was very snippy. You were upset if you sent regards. Kind regards was a little bit more formal. And many thanks was everything is great. And that was kind of what it was.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I've even heard now, apparently, the younger generation, like if you're sending a text, don't put a thumbs up because that's a no-no. And don't use a tick mark because they don't like that either. And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to learn all this. I am not interested in learning all the new things that people don't want you to do. It's like, no, it's just too much.
Yeah, well, yes. And all you were trying to do is say a simple little sentence, And particularly, I guess, when people you're applying for a job, that's when you really have to watch what your words are, because someone may say back and forth a thank you or some kind of instructions or something. And as you say, you have certain words that you really shouldn't reply with. So that you have a long list of words, no words, like you would be. Yes, it is humorous.
It is kind of funny. I didn't know about the regards thing. I don't think I've ever used that word anyway. But see, for me, in text messages and emails, if somebody doesn't send me a smiley face, I just assume that they're mad at me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that regard, because I just wrote a note yesterday to a person and put best regards on there. So I don't know what age they are, but I'll wait and see if that has any application.
Best regards is good. Best. So you've got regards is bad, kind regards is okay, and best regards is the better one. So you are totally fine. Well,
Okay.
for my age range, it depends. You never know.
Okay.
Who you're speaking.
Apparently, regards is too curt.
Yes. Okay. I'll learn something. You learn something every day. Oh, great.
Oh my gosh, this kind of conversation just proves just how wide and various there are. So many things writing can do. And again, it's just a brilliant way to remind people that you are not limited to writing novels. You are not limited to writing just fiction. Maybe we need some more non-fiction books to come out. So we're going to turn to some of the actual questions. And what we've done is we've picked a few specifics, and that's what we're going to talk about. So the first question is, how can you use writing as therapy and help for yourself?
Well, I found that for myself, and I also talk about it a lot at like senior citizens places. I find that it lets a person release their emotion. When you go to talk about emotions or experiences that you've had, it becomes difficult to talk about them verbally, and particularly maybe even to an audience or even to another close person. So that's why you sort of hide yourself by writing it, but then you're still at the same time able to talk about your experience, and it gives you that release. In fact, we find that many celebrities who have been through some kind of a traumatic experience, they'll write about it, and of course we'll buy it. But anyway, both the Veterans Administration and the Department of Aging have evidence, or at least they promote people doing journaling or some type of personal writing where you can enjoy that release time. And a lot of people writing something down is relatively easy for me, but for someone who's just starting, there are ways that you can sort of use a letter approach, like say, dear George, I'm writing you a letter, and then it flows out of you much easier. Or some people will use photographs, or they'll use word prompts. And also I recommend to anyone that wants to get into journaling, carry a little notebook in your pocket And if you see something that interests you, then jot it down. In fact, that's how many poets and other authors, something will come to you while you're out walking or something, and you can write it down in your little tablet and bring it home and review it then later. So actually, I find it, and I hope other people will too, try writing and journaling. And one of the things about the therapy angle is that you can write this sort of letter and then pass, particularly if you write it about some of your ancestral experiences, really Uncle George's, who he was and what something maybe. And of course, if you were in the military, they say that writing about some of those experiences really is something you can hand on to your family, and it explains things to them a little better, and they'll come to understand more about you too.
I can understand that being quite useful. I remember when I was in college, we did a course on psychology, and it was about counseling, connected to counseling. And it was talking about trauma. And one of the methods of helping people who had trauma was called running the trauma. And it was, if you were with a counselor, you would talk about the incident, whatever it was, and you would talk about it. And it would always be very difficult, especially at the beginning. But you would, every session, they would go over it. And it was like a kind of almost like a version therapy. It would eventually, just trying to think of the best way, it almost like it stopped having the same power that it had over the person. Now, I can understand why not everybody would feel comfortable, even in a professional setting with a professional mental health person, would feel comfortable talking about it. But I could imagine if you needed to write it down, where it's just you and the paper, the screen, just getting thoughts and emotions and stresses out onto the screen. I can see that being very useful, and it would probably work in a very similar way as running the trauma by speaking it, because you're still putting it down. You're still having to think about it a little bit to get it out of your system. And again, this is not you write it down and it goes away. It wouldn't. It takes time. And it's the same with the letter. I like that, because I think I remember there was things where it's like if you lost a loved one and you weren't able to say goodbye, the idea of writing a letter to them, even if they weren't going to read it, it was more for your benefit to kind of release all those worries of what you hadn't said to them. So it's one of those things we don't always think about, how useful writing is for our self-care and for therapy. So I really like that as a concept.
And many people also, of course, have put them in a bottle, and they have sailed away, and other people have found them years later. So and written a book about it. But yes, that's the real curing part, our healing part about it. And you do, at least for myself, it does reduce depression, I think, and anxieties, and that's what most people are striving now to do, is sort of, you need to persevere, So it gets you over a bad moment anyway.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually recently started journaling again. I stopped for years and I just picked it back up about, I don't know, a month or two ago. And I find it extra therapeutic when I handwrite. I don't know why. It's just, I feel like when I type on the computer, it feels more like work, quote unquote. But when I handwrite in a journal, it feels more therapeutic. And I change my colored pens for each entry because color makes me happy. And then when I flip through the pages and I see how many journal entries I've made, it's like the rainbow, and it's really, it makes me happy. So that helps too, even if I don't reread the entries. But there's so many benefits to just writing down your thoughts and getting it out. Even if you just do a generic diary entry and you talk about your day, or even if you just make a list before bed and say, here are 3 good things that happened today. Here are 3 things I'm thankful for. It helps so much. And one of the best things about writing as therapy is you don't have to share it with anybody. I know I've seen more and more mental health articles lately online of people sharing their experiences and their own personal stories, which is fabulous. Don't get me wrong. But you don't have to do that. You can just keep it to yourself and you don't need to share it with anybody. So it's basically like stress-free writing at the same time. You're releasing the stress, but you're also not stressing about it.
Well, if it is something you can share, sometimes I've suggested, particularly to older people, to write it out and sort of put it with a sheet of paper with a little ribbon around it and pass it on as a gift sometimes for someone's birthday, because it seems like when you're young, you're not worrying about who your ancestors were. But sometimes as you grow older, people are wondering, what did Uncle so-and-so or Aunt Nellie look like or say or whatever. So if you have a little note that you could give them, it brings brings on a little more bonding. But you hit on something there in your conversation about writing it down by hand. So many schools are not teaching cursive writing anymore. For me to write it down in the square way or whatever printed, it would be difficult. But anyway, that's a point there that maybe they won't be able to read your journal if it's in cursive.
Well, my handwriting is chicken scratch, but to be brutally honest, and I'm gonna probably date myself here, I did learn cursive in school, but I don't remember it because nobody uses cursive anymore. I only know how to sign my name. That's the only cursive I remember.
Well, then you won't be able to go back. While I've been researching my book, Destiny's Daughter, I was back going to the Smithsonian. Of course, all of those records now you can get online. And anyway, when you're looking at their exhibits of what they have, so many of the letters and things from like the Civil War period are written in cursive. So you have to be able to write these teeny tiny bits of information if that's what your research area is in. So yeah, it's writing it down. Everybody seems to have been. We just haven't applied it so much in the past as we are now, and finding it more therapeutic, I guess.
I think I read somewhere that if you actually hand write it, it opens up a different part of your brain. It's a different part that you use rather than if you type it. And it actually helps memory. That's why they say if you're studying, you shouldn't just type up your notes and read them. You should rewrite them by hand because it creates a different pathway and it helps you remember them more. So the more people handwrite things, the better their memory. So as you're talking about like sharing things about experiences, like you've talked about the veterans and everything, if they're writing those things down, it will probably trigger more memories and make it easier for them to recall extra things that connect and make a bigger picture. So yeah, I am all for handwriting, even though I'm very similar to Rachel and my handwriting is awful. I had to read, I still know how to do cursive. I just can't read my writing because my hand is not as fast as my brain. So it kind of, so I had to teach myself to write all in capitals just to make it legible. And then every now and then I'd slip back into cursive and be like, yeah, I don't know what that was. I can't read that. So, but yeah, so apparently a handwriting is good for memory. So if you're listening to this, people, and you are not handwriting, you need to be doing some form of handwriting. It's very important.
And also, we'll draw you back into being able to talk about it verbally, is if you will take what you have handwritten to yourself and read it out loud, then you will sort of begin to feel much more at ease with talking about it. And you can even read your handwriting maybe to a counselor. It depends on what kind of, it depends on, everyone's different. So it really depends on how comfortable you feel with doing all these types of therapeutic writing.
That's actually a really good point. I never really thought about, I mean, I do read my journal entries out loud to myself sometimes because, as Ari said, I can't always read my own writing. So I sometimes trying to sound it out loud helps, but I never really thought about if you write it out and then you say it out loud to yourself, it does get easier to talk about. So that's a really good point because you kind of need to normalize it for yourself so that you gain that confidence and boost your self-esteem and you keep going with it.
That's also a good hint for anyone that's writing anything else. If you're writing, say you're writing advertising copy. If you read it out loud, sometimes you're hearing it back in your ear. It makes sense, or it sounds better or different, and you start changing it. So any type of writing you do, don't hesitate to read it back to yourself, and you'll change things around and do corrections and all kinds of stuff like that. Oh, something else that I just found out the other day, that say for instance, I write a paragraph. There are companies now, and many people talk about AI, I don't want to get into that, but anyway, they have submitted their paragraph to a company that will then enhance what you have written. So of course, here again, that would maybe take me four rewrites before I really straighten my paragraph out. So that it's not all bad what we're hearing about that. But anyway, that's just a little side note that I discovered, I don't know where, somewhere, in some Zoom I've been listening to.
Oh, that's true. That's true. So since we can utilize writing for therapy, there are other outlets to use writing. So whether you decide to share that writing online or you keep it to yourself, you can also write as just a plain hobby and have fun with it. So what are the benefits of writing as a hobby?
Well, personally, I feel really very fortunate that I've been able to use writing as both a career tool and then as a hobby and bring, as you say, relaxation. Although I haven't been writing the same type of material, like when I was in marketing, you can do all kinds of marketing and advertising and that kind of writing, and then you come home and you could write a children's story. But on a short-term hobby, I've had like a photography and ceramics and gardening and so forth, and writing really brought me personally more relaxation. But I think that the IRS that tells you that you can earn up to about $600 as a hobbyist writing, and that brings you a little exhilaration also. Writing seems to always, as I've said before, it seems like, and we said in the very beginning of our talk, there's a little mystique about being able to write. So a writing hobbyist can earn a little bit of money if that's what you want to. But most of the time, a hobbyist will branch out and they'll use it more as a volunteer type of occupation. Because if you can write, as I say in the beginning, a sentence, then you can write the church news, or you can write for the school PTO, or any kind of an announcement. You can even teach a little class if you do enough of it. But as a hobbyist, your intention is not particularly to make a living at it. It's just to be able to express yourself clearly and help others most of the time. And that's where I find most of my friends that they don't write professionally, but they do a lot of writing, even going to nursing homes and writing letters for people and helping out that way as a volunteer. It is a volunteer opportunity, which it's good too.
Yeah, I like that. I like utilizing your writing skills to volunteer. And I think writing as a hobby, it just kind of allows you to explore the different ways of writing, the different skills, different methods and forms and all of that. And it kind of allows you to just really deep dive into what you like about writing, what you don't like about writing, and what forms you favor, and what you're like, I don't really want to do copywriting, I guess. I'd rather write blog articles or newsletters or whatever, which I guess newsletters are technically copywriting, but I digress. But I think, yeah, writing, I feel like the hobby, even though, yeah, you can make a little bit of money with it, which is great. You can either do volunteer or just do it as like a little side income, but you can just kind of explore your options.
Yes. You get a high out of it. That exhilaration. And I think you're also it sort of shows your self-worth too, that you can help out, and other people admire you for it, and you have a good feeling overall.
Yeah, I like that, because it's, as I said, we always sort of think, oh, novels and stories and everything, but there are so many times when good communication, because that's what it's about with writing, it's good communication is key, and helping out someone who is struggling. Like we've dealt with people who have wanted to start a website for themselves and weren't sure how to write the best part of the information, just the startup, like whether it's the about page or the mission statement. And if you have that communication skill and you can help them out, that is really good. And just something that I always think of when I think about little things you can do is the concept of, let me try and remember this, the secretaries of Juliet. Now, they're the ones who would write, like, I think it's, give me a moment, I'm going to say Italy, where people would leave like love letters in a wall, and these ladies would then take them and write answers.
All right.
They actually made a movie, and that's why it became more popular. But the actual Secretaries of Juliet was a thing, and I think it was Letters to Juliet was the movie. And what it was the idea of where Juliet's balcony was. People would write letters and they would say things about love life that they're struggling with, and these ladies would collect them at the end of the day and would respond to them. And that was a real thing. And they just, I'm not sure that it may have been paid eventually, but I don't think it started as a payment. They just wanted to sort of give back to these people who came to this special area and shared their knowledge. And I thought that was such a clever idea and such a nice way to connect people, because again, that's what communication does. It connects people.
Yes. I think there's another Western of some, I can't remember the name either, but where the heroine, she was writing these letters and letting them fly and tying them to a tumbling sage. Those are, see, we're trying to escape here this morning.
We have one more quick question, and that is, because obviously we've talked about most of it, but like, how can you make a living from writing? Obviously, there's novels and everything, but is there anything else that you can do to help make a living with writing?
Well, it's becoming more and more difficult, believe me. You want to continue learning and changing your writing abilities. As a longtime member of the National Federation of Press Women, I informed that more and more small newspapers, like where I began writing, they're folding and they're also being consolidated with larger chain newspapers, so that it's difficult. People are just unfortunately losing their job. So it kind of depends on how much money you really need to make. Most of the freelance people that I know have other types of occupations. They're lawyers, they're teachers, and even people that are having podcasts now they're doing other jobs, so that you have to be willing to change. And of course, to change your style of writing, one good place is to go out on YouTube, and that it's filled with all types of how-to films telling you how to improve advertising writing. And so you can switch into another category. I think, as I mentioned to you, that I've probably been with about 7 different companies and using different types of writing every place that I moved to. But of course, I was very fortunate to have a husband and family that was supporting me. So really, if you're going to have a full-time living out of it, you really have to be willing to change into other categories, or also go into contract writing, where you'll be working for a consulting company usually, and you can work for anywhere 6 months to a year, and they'll send you out to another company to do certain kinds of writing. So when you're talking about other professions, that's a little more of a frosting on their platform, or for their notoriety or whatever. Because as you said in the very beginning, any type of writing that you're able to do, it seems to have a little bit of mystique, or it impresses other people for some reason. And you're looking at them and you think, gee, you could be doing this too. It's not that difficult once you learn the principles of good writing. And of course, that began way back with your English teacher, probably. And even today, you can go online and pick up all of these tips. Purdue University has a whole series of classes and they're all free. And you can learn different things. You can just sit there a few minutes and learn different sections of what you want to write about. So anyway, I hope that we've shared a little bit of our mystique here this morning.
That is it. And honestly, with talking about like making a living, I think you were right by saying it is getting more difficult. And I think there are still quite a few people who have got this like idea that, I'm going to write a novel, I'm going to write a memoir, and it's going to sell millions, and I'm going to be the next big thing. And it's like, obviously it does happen. People do make it big, but I think we do need to be a bit more realistic and thoughtful about it. And as you said, like if you're able to diversify and try different things while working on your novel, while working on your memoirs or anything like that, I think that can definitely help more.
Well, before we close, I want to share my new book with you, Destiny's Daughter. It highlights the life of Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, who is the only woman who has received the Medal of Honor. And I don't know, decades ago, I saw a little clipping about her and sort of started research, and it's taken me a long time to research. But anyway, it finally has been published by a Princess House Press. So that's that I've been spending the past year doing that and learning again. Everything has changed from traditional styles of publishing to what's happening today. So if you're thinking, really writing the book is just the beginning of where you're going to start, because you really need to learn what's happening today, and again what's selling today. So that and that not only applies to books, but that applies to what you're reading in magazines and anything else that you might be writing about, or even having a good conversation about is vital to your keeping alive and persevering.
No, that is absolutely great. And Fran, it has been wonderful having you on the show. Before we go, is there anything else you'd like to tell our readers, or if you have any websites or anything? Obviously, we'll link everything down in the description.
I do have my Facebook website, and if you'd like to have a little commercial, there's a little commercial there, so to speak, about my book, and that's facebook.com/frances.altman.77/ or just on Facebook with my name, and you'll find out a little bit more about what I've been doing. And I don't know, I suggest that you just, everyone that wants to write should never stop learning. You should just keep learning, because it just gives you so many more outlets. And I guess if I had a motto or advice, I just keep telling people, persevere, which at my age, it's what I've been doing during COVID and so forth. It's been a real joy talking with the both of you this morning. And I hope that your listeners have enjoyed it too, or gained something from it.
Oh, that is brilliant. No, and we've enjoyed having you on too. It's absolutely awesome. Obviously, we will make sure that Frances's links are all in the description below. Please do go and check out her work. In the meantime, we will turn it over to you guys. How do you use writing as a creative outlet? Do you try therapy writing? Do you try hobby writing? Let us know your answers in the comments so we can chat about it. And remember, we release new episodes every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing how you can get to know your characters. To ensure you don't miss it, do hit the subscribe button on your way out. And as always, thanks for listening to the May Writer podcasts. We'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by Scribbled Notes. Our handwriting is awful. The music, titled Inspired, is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.